Good morning and thanks for joining us. My guest this morning for the entire half hour is Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be with you, Tim.
My first question for you, let's attack the elephant in the room. South Carolina, first in the South primary. Are you getting your feet in the water right now?
Well, we're certainly starting to think about it. We'll make a decision by the end of February whether or not to begin exploring in a serious way. But you have to, anybody who has any thought at all about this has to be thinking about South Carolina, because in the last 5 Republican nominating processes, every single time, South Carolina ended up voting for the eventual nominee. So anybody who thinks, oh, I want to bypass South Carolina, doesn't understand how important this state is in the nominating process.
So there's a good chance this is not the last I'm going to see of you here in South Carolina over the next couple of years.
Well, I don't want to make a prediction at this stage, but I would say it shouldn't be too great a shock if I show back up.
Okay. I want to talk about the tragedy in Arizona. Watching this and watching the fallout, what do you make of what happened?
Well, I think you clearly have a person who's mentally unbalanced, and you know that from the time they were in the 10th grade in high school, that their teacher and their fellow students thought that they were mentally unbalanced. You know that the U.S. Army turned him down, apparently for drug use. And you know that his writing and his website and all the things we've seen about him, this is a very isolated, lone person who's not political in any normal sense. This is not like an Islamist terrorist who's killing because they want to achieve a political goal. I think this is a person who was unhinged, who hated authority, and who had a chance to go and try to make a name for themselves doing something crazy. And I hope that he does not get an insanity plea. I believe it's very important to communicate that there's a violent level we will not tolerate, and that people like this, I mean, the original meaning of insanity plea was you literally didn't know about reality. This guy knows about reality. This is an angry, bad person who wants to take his anger out on harming other people and who killed innocent people.
This incident has contributed to the political discourse in the country. Should it have, and should it continue?
Well, I don't think it should have, any more than, for example, the Virginia Tech killing a few years ago. We had a very similar personality type. Somebody who was isolated, somebody who the psychiatrist thought was dangerous, but under Virginia law at that time, they couldn't talk about it. So what I'm concerned about is there's some people on the left who would never, ever identify an Islamist extremist, whether it was the New York Times Square bomber, whether it was the Detroit Christmas Day bomber, whether it was the Fort Hood massacre. They'd always say, oh, we shouldn't rush to judgment. And yet here, they said things that were just untrue. Initially, he was described as a veteran of Afghanistan. He wasn't. The Army had turned him down. Initially, he was described as a Tea Party member. He isn't. There's zero evidence he belonged to a Tea Party. In fact, the books he had in his library tended to be left-wing. They were more Marx's Das Kapital than they were conservative documents. So he had a video of himself burning the American flag. This was not somebody I would have thought of as a conservative. But on the left, there's this permanent desire. They're so frustrated by the Rush Limbaughs and the Sean Hannitys of the world that they want to strike as quick as they can, even if it makes no sense at all. And I think there's a really, MSNBC and others have a very fervent desire to characterize things, even if there's no facts.
If the shoe were on the other foot, though, do you think that the Foxes of the world would be bashing the left for the same thing, using it as a political tool?
Well, we went all through a period in the Bush administration when some of the most horrible things were said about the president, and somehow nobody in the left minded. I think that there's a need for civility in public life. I think we have an obligation to try to disagree without being disagreeable. There's certainly an intensity of political language today that I think is unhealthy. But frankly, the larger culture has the same problem. I mean, when you have songs about killing policemen, or you have songs about raping women, I mean, when you have movies that show mass murder as a reasonable behavior, again, that doesn't excuse any violence. So you've got to draw a clear distinction between talk and art on the one hand and action on the other. But it's certainly been a general vulgarization of American life that's far more than just political.
And in the wake of the Congresswoman shooting, do you, as a polarizing political figure yourself, do you ever fear for your safety?
Well, first of all, I have faith in God, and I think God will decide what time I'm leaving. So I don't, in that sense, I have very little fear. My dad was a career infantryman for 26 years in the U.S. Army, and I think he had a similar kind of attitude. I think it's very important, and I said this when I was Speaker, when we had 2 Capitol Hill policemen who were killed in the U.S. Capitol in July of 1998. And I happened the next day to do a national radio address, and I said, you know, we need to honor these men who gave their lives. We need to worry about their families. But the very duty they had of serving the country should remind us that the Capitol has to remain open, that a free society has to allow its citizens to visit those to whom they loan power. And I really hope the Congress doesn't go off on some series of half-baked ideas to further isolate members of Congress. The risk in a free society is that your fellow citizens have to be able to look you in the eye, talk to you face to face, and not be afraid. And I think that it is very important for congressmen and senators not to become isolated. In fact, I would reopen Pennsylvania Avenue. I think any time you say to security people, what would you like to do? It's always more. And I have a hunch that somewhere the Secret Service has a plan for the next 6 blocks out. And I just think we have to relax and say, you know, this is a free country. We have a willingness to take risks. When we describe ourselves in the national anthem as the land of the brave and the home of the free, those 2 things are connected. And it's very important to remember, being free requires being brave.
I want to go to something from your website talking about your time as Speaker, comparing it to now. And on your website, and I think this was from December, you write, "This is not 1995 when the economy was strong, unemployment was relatively low, and we were not at war." What do you draw? Do you draw any similarities between the Congress you took over as to the one that's coming in?
Oh, I think there's some general similarities, but I'm actually meeting with the House Republican Conference, and my first point's going to be, this isn't 1995. I mean, the number one challenge this year is creating jobs, because America works when Americans are working. And therefore, the Congress has to have a much more intense focus on job creation than we historically have had. And I think that you have to recognize that balancing the budget requires getting back down to about 4% unemployment from the 9.4% we had last month. So I think that's different. Second, we have to recognize radical Islamists really want to kill us, and that they are a genuine threat to the United States. Third, we're dealing with a much more left-wing administration. I wrote a book called To Save America that just came out in paperback, and the subtitle of it is Stopping Obama's Secular Socialist Machine. Well, if you look at where the Obama team is compared to Bill Clinton, he's much further to the left. So I think the new Congress has to approach this with a sense that this is a different year. There's some lessons to be learned, but this is a different year with a different rhythm and a different focus than 1995 was.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. We'll be right back.